Welcome back to the lessons on user interface development. And this lesson, we're going to tackle two different forms. First, the defaults form, and then also the payments form. So let's get right into it. And here's where we left off with our client control. So now let's add a new control, and we'll call this control the defaults control. Okay, now again, let's change the orientation. We'll shrink this up a bit, and let's go right over here to client control and grab the font size and the defaults for width and height. That way it's pretty much like the other control. Now I can put that into our form like so, and now we can start working away. Now, the cool thing is with defaults, it's pretty much the same as what we had for the client control, minus a few things. So let's grab the entire thing. Gonna copy the entire thing and paste it over here. And so that looks exactly like the client control. But we can now just start deleting things we don't need. So we don't need row 0. We don't need row 1 or 2. We do need to know if we're going to pre-build the client, the cutoff of the client. We need to have the cutoff number, the minimum hours, the billing increment, if we're going to round up. We also need to know the hourly rate, which, interestingly enough, we don't have over here. I don't see the hourly rate, which is a problem. So we're going to need to make sure we modify the client control as well. So let's go ahead and add another row. Doesn't matter where, as long as they're all auto. And let's stick that after the email. So let's grab the email address. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it in afterwards. I'll set this to be row 3. And make sure it's 3 here. And then I will call this the hourly rate. And it's the hourly rate text box. Okay, which does cause some problems here, but don't worry. We can just come through and start changing rows to be down 1. So row 4, and then row 5. Notice how easy this is? I mean, it'd be nice if we could just say insert and move everything down, but just changing a number is quite easy, especially since I'm only changing it once because of the stack panels. So now we do need to make our height a little bigger. Our design height should probably be more like 75. 500. That's about right, which also means our main control needs to be a little taller as well. So let's, main window. So the height needs to be more like 600. Not a real big fan of that, but I think that it is what it is. So we've got to have all this data on here. Therefore, let's put it in and make sure it works. So you obviously can't crunch it down, but we can grow it a little bit if you want. Client control, and we can grab the hourly rate, which is in row 3, and come back to our defaults and paste that in. So now you have 2 row 3s. So no problem. Let's change that to be row 0. And there we go. So we have hourly rate. Do we want to pre-build a client? We cut off the client? What's the cutoff number and the minimum hours? The billing increment, and the roundup after X minutes. And then our submit button, which is huge. Row 2. No use confusing the next person to come along and say, well, did something delete something? Because we're missing some rows. So there we go. So now the submit button's not in that auto scale row, which I wasn't a big fan of. In fact, let's add another row in here just so it's not in the auto scale row either. It won't affect anything else except the submit button gets a little smaller. Okay, so now in our defaults control, we have our information. Now, the one thing we're not telling people is which menu item we're in. And so we could add that at the top if you wanted to. So we could put above this, this is the client's page, or we could put it on the main window and have it be whenever they click a menu button, it updates that. But I think it's better to put it in here. So again, we're going to have to move everything down one. So this is one of those things that you find out as you go, and that's okay. It's okay to find out to change some things as long as you are not hard coding things. If we'd hard code our locations for everything, then this would be a pain. But as it is, we can just change the rows and life is good again. And now we can add one above. And we're going to do the same thing on the other page too, by the way. Row 0 is going to be just a text block. And we're going to say that the font size is, let's do 24. And let's just start there and just say this is the defaults form. Okay, something like that. Or just say defaults. Okay, and that way it's a little more clear what's going on here. And in fact, if we were to change this over to be defaults control and run this, it should look a little better, hopefully. So there you go, defaults, and it shows up what the defaults are. Okay, so now let's do the same thing. So grab this right here and put it in our client control. And of course, instead say clients. And now we change all these rows. Row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6, not 65, and now again we have that problem of the submit button. So we'll put that one row down, and we probably should make this 525. So it's getting a little bigger. Let's come back over here and change it back to client control and see if it's cut off and how badly it's cut off. It's not cut off. So clients looks good. So I think we can leave it as it is right now. Okay. So now we have our header, we have our information we can update, and we have our defaults control done. So we've kind of worked some kinks out, fixed some things, and made sure we set up our new control properly. Now, again, I'm just putting the content control here just to test things out. That's not going to be a permanent thing. I mean, it will be permanent eventually that it says main control. But for now, it allows me to just test things out. All right. So defaults is done because it really was just a copy and paste job. It's just making a few modifications. So now let's add a new content control, new user control, and we're going to call this one the payments control. And again, we'll change the orientation. Great. I love it. We can have a lot of space to type out things in XAML. Okay, so let's grab our grid definition for our rows. And now we need to add a few things. We need to add our client. We need to add our hours, the amount, and the date. So let's start by getting our drop down for our client. So we have that in our client control, which is right here. So let's grab that. And also don't forget our row 0, which is our header. So let's grab this. Now we're not going to have an edit or an add. So actually our main control should have, and it does, our client in the dropdown. We also need to add that header for our main control. So one more thing to fix. So let's grab the row 0 from default control and add it to our main control. And now we have our, we want to call this main. We want to call this something a little more clear, time entry, something like that. And then just move everything down 1. Probably getting used to this by now, right? All right, so row 4. So now we can grab row 0 and row 1, which is our drop down for our client, and paste it into our control here for row 0 and row 1. It's not going to be time entry. It's going to be payments. And line. And that's just kind of messy, okay? That's going to make this whole screen, take the whole real estate of the screen, and doesn't give us a lot of great options for editing things. I don't think I want to go that complicated. We could, but I think that messes up then the width of what we want for our control. It makes our form a lot more dense. So instead, what we'll do is I'm going to create another dropdown. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. I'm going to call this one the date dropdown. That's in row 2. And so what this will be is the payment date. So you select a client, and then it's going to populate the date dropdown with the dates in which the client made a payment. That's a pretty good identifier for when payments were made, because typically you wouldn't do multiple payments in one day. But even if we did, you'd probably have only 2 to choose from, okay? And then from there, we can edit the other information. Now, the next question is going to be, can we edit the date in which a payment was made? And that's really a subjective one. If we consider that to be kind of set in stone, once you put a payment in for that date, that's when it was made. Or if we want to say, no, we want to be able to edit that date as well. I think what I'm going to say is that no, the date is set in stone. It's whenever you entered it, that's when it was. So we're not going to allow you to modify the date. We'll just allow you to modify how many hours it was for and the amount. Now, you can also add in here a delete payment, but I think for right now, we're going to say, no, let's not add that yet. That can be something we add later, and it won't affect the existing code. Okay, so let's just add 2 boxes that will be just input boxes. So kind of like what we have for, let's say, a name. Okay, notice if I click on name, it takes me to that section. And since I have this right here, it's really helpful. It tells me that this is the whole section. Okay, so I'm going to grab this and say, let's paste it in. We'll make sure it's on row 3. And this isn't going to be name, it's going to be amount. And we'll call this the amount text box. And then we'll do it one more time. And we'll put it on row 4. And this will be the hours text box. And so that's how many hours this payment was for. Okay. And then we can have a save button down below. And we also need to have a way to add new records. So I think the best way of handling the idea of adding a new one is to put a button right next to date. This drop down. So I'm going to actually copy this whole thing and paste it right below the date drop down. So now I can modify this to fit more what I already had here. So let's copy this. We'll paste it in down here, and we'll set the width to be, we'll start off with 150 like the other one was. Now I can delete what we already had here. And now we have an edit and a new, but let's just take out the edit. And then let's add our margin on the left to be 10. Give it some space there. And I think that'll work. The other thing we could do is we could put an or here, and actually we'll just, and that might look okay. So let's try it out. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Text block. And we can just say or, like so. We can set the alignment, the vertical alignment to bottom. So let's grab this and we'll paste it in here. And then we can just say, maybe put the dashes both sides. Like so. I think I want to bring it up a little bit and give it some padding to the left, or actually margin to the left. So margin equals 10, 0, 0, 0. Like so. And actually the bottom I want to have, let's try 10. Oops, not that, the bottom. And that's too much. So 5 might be right. I think that's right. You know, date or new. Okay, that way it's pretty clear that we either select the date or we hit the new button. The new button is going to allow us to hide this and fill in this. Okay, and fill in this information, allow us to edit it, or we can hit the new button, which hides this and allows us to put in a new amount in hours for a specific client. The date will get filled in automatically based upon when we enter it. We hit submit, we're good to go. So that wraps up the payments form. Let's go ahead and test it out by coming over here to our main window, running it, and making sure that, yes, the payments do fit in, of course, very easily into this form. So I think that's good to go. Okay. Now we could make this date control, by the way. We could make this date control an actual date control, maybe put in bold the ones that are the payments were made. But if you're only billing a client, let's say every 2 months, that's going to be a pain to go through. It's also a much bigger control. So this way, very easy. It's a drop down and it shows you your last, your payments. So that way it's really easy. It's sorted by date. Therefore, you can scroll through really quickly and find the date you're looking for. It will only show date, not date and time. So some things we can think through about how to wire these forms up. But for right now, we're just doing the UI of it. All right, so that wraps up both the defaults form as well as the payments form. And we fixed a few bugs we had in the previous form now that we've kind of seen what we missed, especially this label up here, as well as the hourly rate on the client control. So we made some progress. We've got most of the forms done. We'll get to the last of them in the next lesson. But for now, make sure you have these forms in and done. Make sure you play around with it again. Play around with it. Make sure you understand how things are working and why before you move on to the next lesson.